Good morning.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Good morning, Wayne. Good morning, Kevin.
I'm trying to buy some more, okay?
Shalom.
Shalom.
Yeah, but if I'm inside a wall.
Today's Shabbat Indian is good. Borer.
Yep, that's right. All right, my friends, here we go.
Let's go.
Let's go. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Shabbos Daf Ayin Dalid. We're going to be getting a lot of clarity as to what is the criterion that's going to determine whether a specific activity will make it into the count of the Lamites and which ones won't make it into the count of the Lamites Malachas, even though they are prohibited biblically. And we will start to learn through the sugya of Boider, which is a phenomenal sugya in Hilchos Shabbos. And as we're going to go through the Daf Ayin Daled Amud Aleph, we will appreciate how the three pillars of Boider, the three pillars, meaning there are three conditions that if and only if all three are met, one is allowed to do an act of selecting of Shabbos, and that is if you are taking out the oichel mitoich hapsailos. Oichel means not food, it means food that you desire to eat. Psailos refers to food, which might be good edible food, but currently now you do not desire to eat. Your desire will determine whether it's called oichel and psailos. If you take the oichel mitoich hapsailos, that's one of the three conditions which will allow you to do an act of boider. The other one is yad, as long as you are doing it with your hand or whatever halacha considers a hand. Doesn't have to be eating with your hands. We paskin that using cutlery is also called yad. In andere Werte, you're not using an instrument that's made for selecting. A spoon, a fork, a knife is not made for selecting. It's just an extension of your hand to facilitate your eating. The third rule is the rule of miyad, or we're going to use the word la'alter. As long as you are taking the oichel mitoich hapsailos with your halachic yad, and you're going to be eating it halachically immediately, as we'll define, if and when all three are met, then you are allowed to do what one can call an act of boider, because halachically it's not called selecting. Just there's a beautiful mnemonic that we'll repeat, and that's the word ayal. Ayal is aleph yud lamed, and ayal, or ram, is oichel, yad, la'alter. As we mentioned, that is going to be the pillar rules of boider, and we're going to repeat all of this as we learn it inside. We're going to learn also some rules about grinding. We will actually speak out of Machlokes Rishonim, whether certain hetatim that are used for boiler are allowed to be used for toichin or not. We're going to learn Shitas Rashi, Gavaldike Shita, that the definition of cooking is when you are softening a hard object through fire, interestingly. And therefore, we're going to see that there might be certain items that when you put them in fire, this is not food, but this is how we expand the isur of cooking to other articles as well. And it appears to us that it's going from hard to even harder. It's not becoming soft, whether that's included in the isur biblically of cooking or not. We're going to have a scenario of temporary cooking, and we're going to see whether temporary cooking is asur or not. We're going to learn how in the Midbar, the wise women, the women that God granted us tremendous amount of chachma, they were involved in the preparing of the garments. They actually washed and spun the hair on the backs of the goats before they sheared it off, before they cut it off. And we'll see how that plays into various malachos of Shabbos. We're going to learn about the malach question of tying a knot. We're going to see that tying a knot is only us and midai rice is being tied. And Bachlal will be already in Daf Ayin Dalid. The Gemara is going to be asking regarding many of the malachas that we learned yesterday in the Mishnah. The Mishkan Mihava, where do we find them?
Rabbi, you got to tell them to mute themselves. Rabbi Chaim and Shalman.
All of the limites malachas that are enumerated in the Mishnah, perhaps you can say that oifa, that baking is not exact, but it's still exact enough that they needed to be done in the Mishkan, and that is going to be, as we began in the beginning of the intro, one of the criteriums needed to have a specific act included in the lamites malachas. Okay, having said that, let's go. We left off on Daf Ayin Gimel Amid Beis, 3 lines before the bottom of the Amid by the 2 dots. The Gemara is referring, going back to the Mishnah, Hazoirem, winnowing is after the threshing, after the animals trampled on the ears, and therefore there was already a separation between the stalks and the kernels, but they're all mixed together. You would put everything in a shovel, you would throw it up in the ear, and with the right amount of a ruach matsuya, so the wind would be strong enough to blow away that which weighs less. The wind is not strong enough to blow away that which weighs more, which is perfect, because the shaft, the klipa, has less weight in comparison to the kernels. So the kernels fall back down into the shovel. But a lot of the psoilus gets blown away. It's called winnowing. But it is then selecting. Selecting, as we'll see, was done with an instrument, with a keli. Toichin is grinding. And then after the grinding, there would be another type of selecting known as merakate, sifting. So asks the Gemara, emes, that all of these were done in the Mishkan. Now let me just speak something out. Perhaps it wasn't clear yesterday. Tana, we said, Sedura de Pas Nakat. The Tana is going through these items which are indeed done when one is preparing and baking bread. In the Mishkan, in the Meleches HaMishkan, as defined by almost all of the Rishonim, Meleches HaMishkan doesn't mean that which was done in the Mishkan to maintain the Mishkan. In the avoid of the Mishkan, there was a lot of baking, right? We have the lechem apanim. We have many carbon menachos, as we learn in Masechtas Menachos, that were baked. But Meleches HaMishkan is defined as that which was done in the building of the Mishkan. In the building of the Mishkan doesn't only mean the building of the building itself, but in the preparation of the articles that needed to be used in the Mishkan, in making the hides that are going to be used as the walls and the roof of the Mishkan, including the preparing of the samemanim that were used in the ketaides, and also other samemanim, other herbs that were prepared to be used as dyes to color various parts, either of the garments or of the walls and the roof of the Mishkan. Now, everything that the Mishnah mentioned in the first 11, the Sedura de Pas, beginning with planting and plowing in that order, in the opposite order as we learned yesterday, etc., including Zoyre, Boyre, Trechen, and Manakid, all of these things were done also to seeds of herbs that were going to be developed, again, either into the samamanim, into the ketaides, or they're going to be used as dyes. The only one that's actually not exact is that in the Mishkan, everything made in the preparation of the Mishkan at the end were cooked. And the Mishnah doesn't mention the word bishul, the Mishnah mentions the words oifa. And indeed, Baking, nothing in the prep, in the Melachas HaMishkan was baked. Other than that, all of these things are both done in preparation of bread. Just to be aware that even Zoyda, there are certain herbs that first you have to winnow them, then you have to select them, and then you have to grind them, and then you have to sift them. Okay. The problem the Gemara, I just want to say that we shouldn't get tripped up later, but the kasha the Gemara is going to have is that from these four, grinding is a whole different type of activity. The kavana of grinding is to grind, to make something bigger into something smaller. But Zoyre, Boirer, and Meraket are all different types of separating the bad from the good, or the good from the bad. They're not the same, right? When you're a winnowing, you're separating the shaft from the kernels. The sifting is mamish, taking out small particles from the flour, v'chulei. But it's the same concept. So asks the Gemara, Hainu Zoyre, Hainu Boirer, Hainu Meraket. It's all, you're separating, the edible from the inedible part of the food or from the herb, v'chulei. So why does the Mishnah count it as three? The Mishnah should have mentioned one, and we on our own would have included the others. Now, just to contrast this, just to quickly chazer, we learned yesterday something gavaldik. The Mishnah mentioned zoireya. Zoireya is planting seeds, or in English called sowing. What is mamish the same? Noiteya, just for example. Noiteya is when you are planting a sapling. You're planting a little tree into the ground. And what did we learn in the top of the Amud Ayin, Gimel Amud Beis? That we learned in the Brais, it's the same, it's the same Av. It's the same Av. Just a chap, chevre. Noiteya and Zoireya are mamish the same. Here, Zoirer, Boirer, and Meraket are not mamish the same. They're not mamish the same. They're more dissimilar. But nevertheless, we would automatically include them. And I would argue that one would not be a tulda of the other. They would all be also in the same, they would be considered even an av, as we learned above in the Amid. And we have two important answers for this question. Why indeed does the Mishnah count each one separately? This is the criterion, this is the cloud. Any action, any activity that was done in the Mishkan, and as we mentioned, even though in the Mishkan we're not using this for bread preparation, but we're using it for Samamanim preparation, and yes, they did Zoirer and Boirer and Meraket. Look in Daf Ayin Daled, Afagav, the Ikad, the Dam Yolei, even though one action is very similar to the other, nevertheless, Chashiv law, we're going to touch the word Chashiv, not as Chashiv, as Chashivus, but Chashiv as we'll count it. They are counted, they are reckoned. Look inside the top Rashi, Afagav the Ikam, Achriti Bahadad the Dam Yola, nevertheless, Kama. Rashi says, Chashvinun litarvayu, the Mishnah counts both, or here all three, Ka'avais, the Afagav, even though that they are, they're very similar, but since every step was done in the Mishkan, that's the criterion. If the Havi of a Mishkan, it's counted as an Av. So the Gemara right away has a counter question. Let the Mishnah also count pounding, that there is a step of further separation. This is part that you pound the item when it's already relatively ground up into even smaller particles, and that really allows you to make even a more refined separation, taking out that which for you is not as refined, what is for you psilis, from what you will leave, what you will call oichel. Look inside the Rashi. Where do we have koitesh, chitin, b'machteshes? You have the little mortar and pestle. And why do people do that? That's important. Rashi is emphasizing this is not done to make it even more refined. It's not an additional step of toichen. It's an additional step of separating. And that's lahasan klipasan. And importantly, hold on. I know that people use that when it comes to flour, but if we just, Abaye and Rava just said it has to be milsa dahava b'mishkan, did they have this in the Mishkan? Rashi says, yeah. The third line from the top, and dahavoi b'migdash b'samamanim. Yeah, the same thing is done in Samamanim. Elolav, before we had the Gemara's discussion here, we understood like the Mishnah didn't mention it, because this is mamish like dash. It's mamish dash. What the dash is when the animals trample on the whatever you gathered from the ground. That's the first step of selecting. Mamish, you're trampling upon it in order for you to have a separation from the stalks and the shaft and the klipa from the kernels. And that allows you to make a better separation. And it's very similar to dash. Dash is very coarse. You have behemoths trampling on. Here you have things already that are relatively clean and refined in a little keli with a little shtekela. Doesn't matter. But hold on. And why is this Tuma the dash? Because the hanami mifrika milavushi. Both of them are removing something from its garment. The garment being the klipa. The garment being that which for you will be psilus. So we understand why it's not mentioned. But now that you're telling me that anything that is in the Mishkan, even though similar to the other, as a standalone av, so why doesn't the Mishnah count it quite? So Amar Abaya, this is very important. Abaya answers yes. In the Mishkan, when they prepared the Samamanim, they did an act of pounding. Since, like we mentioned, the Mishnah is Sidura, the Pasnakat, the Mishnah at the end concludes with oil, which also have these same steps. When you make bread, some people do koitesh, wealthier people that understand that whole grains is not good for them. It's better to have white flour, not bleached flour, but completely refined flour. Amar Abaya, and that's only a wealthy person, but a person that wasn't that wealthy and they want to have more. Don't forget, the more you separate, the less you end up with. You want to eat more. And being again that the Mishnah is transferring over everything into bread preparation. Wow. So even though the Havya b'Mishkan, which is koitesh, by the Samamanim, and by bread, many people do it, but the Aniyim don't do it. So therefore it's not counted. And don't forget, it's included in Dash. So now there's a nuance to this criterion. It's not stam kol milsi dahava b'mishkan. It's kol milsi dahava b'mishkan. And when you're speaking about pas and the Tanach, for some reason, Dafka wants to speak about these 11 steps as they relate to pas. By pas, not everyone has 12. Not everyone does koitesh. Everyone does the 11. So the Mishnah counts the 11. Look inside Rashi, 5 columns in the top. Ktisha, lakach, afal gav dahavya b'migdash. It's in the migdash for not making bread. And by the way, the migdash is not a place of aniyim. Even if they would have been making bread, they also would have done koitesh. But the ikris by the Samamanim, they did this additional pounding. And therefore, Zakt Rashi, av melachehi. It's an av melacha. I just want to stop. I know this. It's a pity that Chaval al-Azman, the opposite. We don't have enough time. The Maram learns in Rashi, which is just a big chiddush. He has a problem with it himself. That he understands that what Rashi is really saying, that Ketisha is really a stand-alone av. Because since it was in the Mishkan, the Mishnah doesn't count it. Standalone av, the way he understands in Rashi, many people argue with his understanding in Rashi, he holds that the person were to do dash and koitesh, the helam echad, the chayiv tu chatois, which is huge, mamish. So it's not 39, it's really 40 av malachas. Anyways, not everyone learns that way in Rashi, but just I want to bring that out. That's when you learn this in yeshiva. That's the Gavaldik Chiddush of the way some understand Rashi's opinion. Back inside the Gemara. 3 lines from the top. Rava gives another answer.
Rabbi, can you mention to Yaakov, he has to mute himself, Yaakov Kameko.
Thank you. Now also, just to point out another Stamadiyuk, that Abaye v'Rav Amri Tarvayu. You understand? And who's giving this new approach? Rava. These are unusual things. Which one did Rava say? Rava says, no, I'll tell you why. Our Mishnah goes like Rebbe. What does Rebbe say? And Rashi quotes Rebbe is recorded on Daf Tzadik Zayin Amid Beis, and we had Rebbe before. That where do we get the remes to the 439 from? Remember, Eila Hadvarim. So Dvarim, Hadvarim, Eila Hadvarim. Dvarim is 2, Hadvarim is like extra letter, that's just 3. Eila is Bigamatria 36 and 3 is 39. Rebbe Hidi Amar Ava Malachas Abayim Chasar Achas. And therefore, you're right. Koitesh was in the Mishkan, but you can't count it because then you're going to have 40. So the Gemara says, hold on. If you're telling me that really it should be counted, it's like anyone else. There's no deficiency. If whatever criterion you're using, Koitesh fits that criterion. It should be counted. Elamai, you can't end up with more than 39 counted in the Mishnah. So the Gemara says, we began our shiur today by asking that Zoyder, Boyder, and Meraket are all similar. So you have 3 similars in separating. You only have 1, Dash and Koitesh is like pounding to separate. They're also similar. So why would you have 3 and 1? Make 2 and 2. Take out one of the Zoyder, Boyder, and Meraket. So you'll have 2 steps in the sifting, in the separating, and then yes, add koitesh, dash, and koitesh. 2 acts of pounding in order to separate. So the fact that the Mishnah did not do that, see here we say like Abaya. Like Abaya. Abaya says, no, that there's a reason why koitesh is not in. Yes, kol milsa dahava b'mishkan is going to be counted. But when you, since the Mishnah wants to speak them out as they are in bread preparation, and since not everyone did koitesh, so the Mishnah doesn't count it. L'kula alma, according to all of the achronim, all of the Rishonim will be learning that in the answer of Rava, clearly koitesh remains a tulda of dash. And if you do both, you're only going to be chayiv 1 chatos. Okay, Chavre, that's enough of this. And now, fasten your seatbelts, we are starting to learn the sugya of boired. The malach of boired, like all the other malachas, isn't, as we will, just giving one short intro. And there's so much more to be said. The Balamor says the following, that normally by Hilchas Shabbos, as we have been learning so many times, we have this general concept of a malacha shetzricha legufa versus a malacha she'ein tzricha legufa. And by a malacha she'ein tzricha legufa, the rule, and we learned already, there's a machlokes Rashi Tosfos. Rashi says, malacha she'ein tzricha legufa means you're doing something to prevent something from happening, right? The case will be, you have a person that is a mace in a home. We're speaking about meleches hoitza'ah. We're not speaking about muksa now. Taking them out of the home would be an act of transferring. A person doesn't want to transfer the mace because they want the mace outside, like they did in the Mishkan, that they wanted the article from here to go there. They simply don't want the mace to be in the house because there's a bad odor. So there's a mach now. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you still chayiv chatas. According to Rabbi Shimon, you're not chayiv chatas. It's also only midrabanan. Okay. So says the Balamor that there are certain malachas, and he gives us as an example, which is boired. Boired is by default a malacha she'ein tzricha legufa, because when you're doing an act of boired, that which you are taking out, and as we'll see, boired is taking out the bad from the good. That which you are taking out, you don't want, you're going to throw away. And so you can say, according to Rashi, that's preventative. You don't want the pseilos to be in there. It's not called the malacha she'ein tzricha. It's an exception, because in the Mishkan, every act of boired was to get rid of the not good. So even though, however you define malacha she'ein tzricha legufa, if you would theoretically put that criterion on boired, you would argue that boired is malacha she'ein tzricha legufa. We obviously don't say so. Thus is boired. Boired is getting rid of the garbage. So if you want to use the word you're preventing garbage from being in it, well, that's what they did in the Mishkan. So that's also l'kula alma, a chayiv chatas, or God forbid, chatas and skila. Okay. Let's start inside. What is beautiful is that Tosfos is girsa, third Tosfos in the Amid, is that the Braisa says shnei minei oichalim. This is very important, even though even without this girsa, we have the same conclusion. When you speak about separating, which means by default, good from bad or bad from good, it doesn't mean objectively bad. Oichel means that which you want. And pseilos means that which you don't want right now. If you don't want it right now, you want it out, we're going to call this pseilos, which is why it's really 2 types of food. It's not bad and good. It's not klipa only and kernels. Klipa taka is bad. Kernels is good. Even if it's 2 foods, but you don't want one of them. So now, says the Braisa, now the Braisa is enigmatic, and we're going to have many ways of understanding the Braisa, and many of these approaches trickle down all the way halacha l'mais. Says the Braisa, you may select and eat. Statement number 2, you may select and leave. Leave for someone else to eat. That's the way we're going to learn. So you can select for you can select and leave for someone else. But don't select it. It's another clause. We'll see what that refers to. And then the final clause, the 4th clause, the imbided, and if you did do birur, if you did select, then you chayiv chatos. Okay, so Maika Amar Vashteta. Let's break down the Braisa. Many approaches. Ula, Amar Ula, Hachika Amar, says Ula the following. Ula is based on the premise that the definition of selecting, the type of selecting is something, an action that you are doing for storage. That's the way Ula understands. During eating, if it's not for storage, whatever it is that you do is not called selecting. You're eating. So Ula says like this. What's the meaning for storage according to Ula? Storage means it's for tomorrow. If you're selecting in order for you to eat today, now, later, I don't care, today. Likewise, maniach always means you're leaving it for someone else to eat. Today, that's okay, because that's not called selecting, because selecting, according to Ula, means when you're doing an act for storage. Eating anything today, even though I'm preparing it in the morning and I'm going to eat it in the afternoon, it's not called storage. However, the Braisa goes on to say, but for tomorrow, you may not separate. And the so says Ula. Rab Chizda challenges the premise. When it comes to bishul to afia, you don't say, well, if you're doing it for today, it's not called cooking. Oh, yes, it's called cooking. You're not eating it. You're doing a pre-eating step. So just like cooking, no matter whether you're going to eat it today or tomorrow, it's the same act of cooking. Why should selecting be different? He challenges the premise. Oh, like this. As we spoke out in almost all of the malachas in the Mishkan, in almost all the malachas, let's say, of food preparation, Shitas Rashi, a side of Harisha, you have the minimum share for you to be chayiv chatos, and that is a groi geres. So a person may select less than the share. But why may they select less than the share? L'shitas Rab Chizda, guys, don't forget, chatzi shiur, even though you're not going to be penalized, we paskin like Rabbi Yechanan. Rabbi Yechanan says chatzi shiur is also min ha-Torah. However, Rab Chizda holds that since during eating, the way you eat is selecting, that's part of eating. You don't put everything in your mouth. Look at your plate. Some of it you put in your mouth, some of it you leave. So anything that's done, let's go, b'derech achilosoi, that is called eating. That's called eating. You're eating. How do you define eating? According to Rab Chizda, not storage for tomorrow. How much of it you're doing. People don't put too much food in their mouth at one time. So if they do a little amount, which is less than the grey getters, his shita would be, that's derech achilasi, that's not called selecting. And likewise, that doesn't only mean if you're eating. I can even do it for someone else, because I'm doing that amount, which is called derech achilasi. But all of that is pachas mikashir. I do want to point out quickly, it's a very limited time. Guys, remember this klal. And we spoke this out when we spoke on the Sfasemis yesterday on the Toisvus. There are certain activities that are asur, and if you do less than the quantitative amount, you are doing it b'chatzi shir. God says don't eat chazir, don't eat non-kosher. Eating means a kazayis, punishable eating. So if a person, God forbid, eats less than a kazayis, they ate what less than a shir. There are certain activities that when you don't follow the shir, you don't have chatzi shir. You have what we will call a chatzi malacha. Let me give you one great example. We began this masechta with hoitzah. And how did we define hoitzah? A akira and a hanacha. If a person made an akira without an hanacha, they didn't violate hoitzah b'chatzi shir. No, they violated the rabbinic. Midrash said they did a chatzi malacha. The definition of hoitzah is akira and hanacha. If you don't have that, you don't have an act of hoitzah. Coming back over here, similarly, the way Tosfos understands Rab Chizda shita, that less than a shear, it's not a chatzi shear. He understands that if it's less than a shear, just like Ula held that if you're doing something for storage, that's boider. If you're not doing it for storage, it's not called selecting halachically. If you're doing it in a very small amount, which is how people eat, it's not called boider. And it doesn't go into the problem of a half a shear. However, now that's Shitas Rab Chizda. Rav Yosef clearly disagrees. He holds that if you are boited less than the shear, groigeres, you're not going to be chayiv chatos, but this is a bona fide chatzi shear. And chatzi shear, we pass like Rabbi Yechanan and Zasim and Atoira. Maskal Rabbi Yosef, v'chimutel efos pachos mikashir. No. Selecting, don't tell me that since you selected less than a shear, you didn't select. You did an act of selecting. Alamatz pachos mikashir. But again, we paskin that it's asur midoy raisa, and the raisa would not write that you can lachatchila do it. Elam Rabbi Yosef. Oh, now we're already starting. This is the first. That's mamash Allah. Biyad. If you are selecting with your hand, And guys, my friends, bekitzer, the hand doesn't mean your fingers. The hand means today that people, civilized people, at least when other people are watching, eat with a fork and a knife, that's called biyad. Means you're not using an instrument that's meant for separating. You're eating. But I can separate whether for me or for maniach if I'm using my yad. And now Rabbi Yosef introduces that when we had 4 clauses in the Mishnah, it's not 2 cases, muter or aser, it's really 3 steps. Muter, aser midrabanan, and then chayiv chatos. The next step is referring to if a person is using a rudimentary, a relatively unsophisticated boirer keli. But if a person uses a kanoin, a certain type of funnel, now most people didn't use a funnel to separate, but it was you can use it. You put the beans in one end, and then the other end was more narrow, and if it rolled out slowly, some of the cleap of the bean would stay in the funnel, only that which weighed more would fly out. A tamchoy is they had a large plate, and would put, let's say, beans on a large plate, and they would tilt it. When you tilt a plate, that which is heavier rolls to one end, and that which is lighter would adhere to the plate. Again, these are kalim that were not mamish made for sifting, but people will use them for sifting. So if you use a unusual keli for sifting, let's call this sifting, people didn't sift, they sifted with a sieve or with a keli made. Then lo yivrer, yitaka shouldn't do it because even shaloi kedarkoi is aser midrabanan, but the imbirer pater amalasa. And then the final clause of the Mishnah is right, a fine sieve, a coarse sieve, kalim made for sifting, then lo yivrer, the imbirer chayiv chatas. You're adding too much into the brais. You're making up the middle stanza, a standalone. It's also midrabanan, this keli, that keli. The brais needed to at least hint to it. No, kenizai. Here again, another din halacha l'maisa. The beginning of the brais, the first 2 statements. When are you allowed to do an act of boirer, of selecting? That is, if you are taking the oichel fruit from the waste. Food again means what you desire. That's oichel. What you do not desire now is called now psoilos. And the same thing is for your fellow boirer umaniach. If you are taking the food out of the psoilos, however, psoilos that already lo yivron, even biyad, even for immediate consumption. This is not lacha. So weiter, just like Rav Hamnuna was not happy with the answer of Rabbi Yosef is because you're adding too many fundamental rules that the Braisa B'chlal didn't even allude to, the konoin and the tamchoy versus a naf and a kavara. So same chash on you. Maskav la rabaya midi oichel motech pselis ktani. And also it's not written. Elam rabaya. Another rule, which this rule is halacha l'mais. Boirer v'oichel la'alter. When I said the mnemonic of ayol, that's the lamed. Not miyad, but la'alter is the lamed. La'alter. If you're selecting in order to eat the oichel immediately, and again, bekitzer, there's a whole sugya, how do you define immediately? And we paskin that immediately means as you are preparing for this meal. If it takes a person an hour to prepare for a meal, that is la'alter. But they can't go in the middle of food preparation and go for a walk. Okay? La'alter is as you are preparing this meal, then you can do boirer v'oichel. And not only if you're preparing for you to eat, the same thing is if boirer umaniach for someone else to eat if it's la'alter. But even if it is l'boy bayoim, but not la'alter, then lo yivron, even though you're using your hand, and even though you're doing oichel mitay chapsoilos. And the imbirer, nasa keboirer loitzer v'chayv chatos. And when they told his explanation of the Braisa, Omar Lu Rava says, Shapir Omar Nachmeni. Nachmeni's are good. We already spoke out many times that Abaye was not really his name. And Abaye was raised by Rabba Bar Nachmeni. One opinion is that Rabba loved his adopted son so much that Rabba called him by the name of his father. My Nachman, Rabba Bar Nachmeni. Nachmeni. So sometimes he's called Nachmeni. It means Abaye Zog Zeir good. So what do we have again? That's the ayal, and indeed we have 3 criteriums, and all 3 have to be met, not one of the 3. If it is aleph, oichel mitay chapsoilos, and yud is yad, you're eating it with your halachic hand. And la'altir, then indeed you can do what one can call boiter, because then we don't call that boiter, we call that you're eating. That's the way that you eat. Okay. Says the Gemara, two foods, again, here clear, even without the Tosfos's emendation, here everyone has two foods. Bider v'achal, bider v'hiniach. There's a certain scenario that the Gemara is referring to. You separate it for you separate it for someone else. Rav Ashi had a brisa that said, on this case, pater means you violated the rabbinic, but you're not chayiv chatos. And Rabbi Yirmiyah Medifti says, no. The brisa says, on this case, chayiv. The Gemara explains what's the case. Rav Ashi masni pater, I v'hatoni chayiv. We learned above chayiv. So lekasha abukane v'tamchoy. That's the concept of yad. Only with your hand it's good. But if you're not using a hand, you're using an instrument, then we accept what we had above. If you're using a rudimentary implement, not mamish made for sifting, you are using it for sifting, then it's pater. Why is it pater? Because it's sifting shaloi kedarkei. Okay, and according to Rabbi Yirmiyah, who already learned at Rabbi Midifti, that this brayso is also speaking about your sifting with a keli, with a sifter, with a sieve. And that's chayiv chatos, even if you're eating it miyad, even if you're eating it loud. Now we're learning a story, and this story is also halacha l'mais. Kiyasa Ravdimi Omar. Ravdimi came from the Holy Land. He shared the following: that shapso that Abibi Havoy. As Rashi says, there was a rotation when one had the schus to be meshamesh the other chachamim. So it was the Shabbos that Rav Bibi was the waiter. And during that Shabbos, v'ikloi Rav Ami v'Ravasi, who came to visit the Chashav Rav Ami and Ravasi. And for that, they wanted to bring special delicacies. The special delicacies was a basket of fruit. The fruits that were obviously already detached on before Shabbos, many of them had the stems on them, and they had leaves on them. There were certain parts that we will call psoilus, taka psoilus. Now, Shada Kamayo Kalkala the Peri, what Abivi did was he took that whole basket and he scattered them on the table. And when he did that act of scattering, the leaves are shvach, they're not connected that strong. Automatically, the leaves separated themselves. That was what happened. The lo yodana, however, we don't know. Question is, why did he have to scatter them? Now that we established that if you have all the three rules, including you can do an act of selecting, why did you have to scatter it? Whoever wanted a fruit should have taken the fruit off the leaf. That's so maybe he doesn't subscribe to that, which is why you scattered it. Well, it's maybe he allows he allows it. And even more, maybe he allows even for later consumption, many Rishonim say. He was very lenient. And he could have prepared the basket a few hours earlier as long as he would have taken the fruit off the leaves. But when he came to the table with such chash of a guest, he wanted the basket to look full. And if he would have selected it, there wouldn't have been leaves, but the basket wouldn't have been as a ungepackt. Marketing, packaging. He wanted the ayin yofi. But maybe he was super lenient. We don't know that. I want you to know that this concept of scattering is used halacha l'mais. Don't forget that selecting isn't only by food, but as we'll learn throughout the sugya, selecting goes to cutlery. And if you want to set your table tonight till Friday night for Shabbos day, even if you're taking out of the bunch the fork because you want the fork to set up the table, but it's not the la'alter. Guys, if it's not la'alter, it's boired. So how does one set up the table Friday night for Shabbos morning if all the cutlery are bunched together? The solution is throw the cutlery on the table, scatter the cutlery. Now, I don't know how many inches they have to be apart from each other, but once halachically it's not entangled, then you can take whatever you want. Weiter. Says the Gemara Chizkiya Amar, turmus, we have this many times. It's a certain very bitter bean. It's called in English a lupine bean. It needs to be cooked many times over for it to become edible, for the bitterness to go away. Now, even after you cooked it all these times, there's still a klipa, and you got to take the bean out of the klipa. So Chizkiya says that if you take the turmus from the psoilus, you're still chayiv. The question is why? Why? If it's ayal, You're taking oichel matech hapselis, you're doing it biyad la'alter, says more, leima kashav chizkia, that even oichel matech hapselis asur, which would make eating extremely difficult. Like, how would you eat? Remember, it says no. Shani turmusim, daf ein daladom and base, a big chiddush, the sholki leishivas, since it has to be cooked 7 times for it to become sweet enough to eat. And guys, whoever is in the world of cooking, once you cook something so many times over, it's very gooey. And if you don't right away take out the good from the bad, leaving it the way it is in a very short amount of time, it all becomes farfallen. And if you don't remove the shaklile, if you don't remove the bean right away, masrach, even the bean will spoil. So there's an irony. Instead of calling everything psoilus, we call the bean psoilus, and we call everything else oichel, because everything else, there is oichel in here. We're very machmir here. And we view this psoilus metoich oichel dami. Again, the bean itself is called psoilus. You're taking it out and you will eat it, because if you don't take it out very quickly, it's going to spoil. We can call it psoilus. On the other hand, we view the pot as oichel. L'chumra both sides. And therefore, here you have a problem. The only way to have these beans on Shabbos is not only cook them 7 times from before Shabbos, separate them from before Shabbos. And if not, you can't eat them. Chaval, that we can't learn more. Afachba, there's so much in Beider. Now we're moving on to Teichen. Okay, Teichen. Amar Papa. So Teichen is grinding. Says Rav Papa, Haiman the parim or the farim silka. If you are going to be mincing beets, you're chayiv because of Teichen. Oy gewalt. Says the holy Rashba. Why do you chayiv for Teichen? Only for later consumption. Guys, this Rashba is in the Ramah. By the Ashkenazim, right? Can you dice up certain things very little? At a certain point, it's called already Teichen. And here we're saying clear it's Teichen. Rashba says, yeah, it's Teichen if it's not la'alter. If you're doing it la'alter, right, then you could. One thing, look inside the top Tosfos. Now this Tosfos is gavaldik. Says Tosfos, dafke besilka. Only by silka the shaykh tchina. Avol sha'or oicholin, you could dice them up. Now, how is Shari Cholin different than beets? That's the big debate. Some understand in Tosfos that beets, if they're not cooked, maybe if they're not cooked, they can be eaten as they are raw. They only become edible if you dice them up. If that's the pshat, then you have another big heter. Because many of the vegetables and the tomatoes that people dice up, you can eat them before they're diced up. You can eat a tomato the way you eat an apple. So then it won't be included in the Isser, according to that understanding in Tosfos. Okay, let's go weiter. Every line, Chevra, is a gold mine. Haiman de Solis Silte. Let's move all of these malachas to non-food items. If you have wood, and today you have these fuel liquids, amachaya. How did they start fires then? You would take some wood, you would chop them into thin chips. Thin chips are much easier to chop fire. If you do that, yeah, it's also teichen, you're grinding it. And no one is debating that. Amar Ravashi, I'll tell you something more. If you're particular about the measure, then you have another. Then you're going into another issue. Even if you didn't cut it up into little shtikalach, if you have one large item and you cut them into smaller sizes, but the size that you are cutting them into is particular, you want that size. That's pshat of machatech. That's cutting. As we spoke out quickly when we learned the Mishnah, machatech means that you're cutting something into a specific size, versus when you're cutting or ripping something and you don't care about this specific size. Okay, right. Halosh ve'oifer. The final two in the 11th Shabbos. Huh?
Why is he cutting wood chips on Shabbos?
No. He shouldn't. He shouldn't, but he did so. In other words, just to point out, there are many other issues. You can't be mechin the Shabbos l'chayil. Correct. We're not going. He wants to just make it clear that these malachis, even though they were done food related, they are much broader than food related. And by the way, that's not only by Teichen, that's by Boirer, and that's by everything else we learn in the Mishnah. Let's go, and almost everything else we learn in the Mishnah.
We had yesterday the pruning, where you prune the tree and you're using it for the wood, so you're chayav on two.
That's what your kavanah is. Very good. I think that the point of Ravashi is that if you're machatech it not into small pieces, it won't serve fuel, but you cut it for a reason. You want to have a tefach block. You want to have a 2x4. Shine. If you began with the log, that's called cutting. Like we spoke out today, every single one of the first of the 10 out of the 11, they were taken done in the preparation of samamanim. Every single one. But now, at the end, they cook the samamanim. Baking is bread. It says the Gemara Tanadi done, Sidura, the pas nakat. We're speaking about pas. Pas is a staple food, and really, Al Pi Chasidus is so clear why the Mishnah Dafka speaks about pas. The Mishnah is talking about we may not do. We're speaking about basic life activities. Even in Nigla, the Pnei Yeshua explains this. There is the staple food, and then you have levushim, and then you have bias. So the Mishnah is speaking about activities that we do to live. And these activities, if there is a transforming aspect to it, if there is a certain similarity into what God did when he created, which is God is yesh miyayin, but we can do yesh miyesh, exactly that we are to rest from doing. If you take a moist peg and you throw it into a oven, and therefore the oven dries it out, and I know mavashel and oifa is the same. Again, we are expanding the oifa not only for food. Of course. Oh, here's Gavaldik. Again, like we spoke at in the introduction, so Rashi, so many Rishonim, that the definition of bishul is softening a hard object. When you have a moist peg and you throw it into an oven and it becomes dry, it also becomes harder. So you made from hard into harder. It never became soft. Since your kavan is to strengthen the peg, including making it hard, and that's not bishul, at least not the oiraisa, kamash malan, that even physically, when you put wood into an oven, wood itself, not the moisture in the wood becomes soft when it's in the oven. So there is a certain step of it becoming softer. Since the mirpa rafi, and only then does it commit, does it become hard, yechayev chatos. If a person heats up pitch, another gavaldik bishul, pitch, my friends, when it's hot, becomes liquid. So yeah, it's not food, but you're making it soft. So it's bishul. But hold on, the moment the pitch cools down, it loses that liquefied state. It's only liquefied when it's boiling hot. So let's call this temporary cooking. What you're doing will not last. So chayiv mishum mavashel. So the Gemara pshita, but he thought the only chiddush was that even though it's not food, we still apply the love, the malach of mevashel. That we already know. Mar says, no, there is a huge novelty. Even though a kusha, it will become hard again. It's going to go back to its original state. Whatever you achieve by boiling it is only temporary. And my friends, when it comes to many other malachas and Shabbos, temporary is not called a malacha biblically. So that's the enei maloi kumash malan, that by bishul, even temporary cooking is called cooking. Another gold mine. Whoever it makes a earthenware barrel, he's chayiv sheva chatois. And Rashi enumerates the sheva chatois: grinding, sorting, sifting, kneading, smoothing, kindling, baking. The chiddush of here, it's possible we don't have that much time, is that if chodesh, we don't call chodesh. When you get the earth, that's not called charisha, as we learned yesterday. Why? Why not? I'm reading inside Rashi, Mamish, the last line in the narrow lines, that chiyuva the choifer leka, because the ein sarach elola afra. Because when you are taking out the earth from which you'll make this keli, you don't want the whole. Charisha, by planting, you want the furrow. Here, no, you don't want the whole, you want the earth itself. So that's not, let's go with Tosfos, it's not for the same purpose they did Chodesh in the Mishkan. And let's go, indeed, Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rashi, you'll be chayiv. But we paskin like Rab Shimon. He's paskening Rava, that's his chiddush. That first step, you're not allowed to do that. It's also midrabanan, but you only chayiv 7 and not 8. That's the chiddush, the way we learn the Gemara. Next step, tanura. If you're making an earthenware tanur, Aside of all the 7 that we learned, there's another one. Here the chiddush is, what's the 8th? The 8th is that when you make a barrel, once you finish with the barrel, which is the final thing is you put it in a kiln, you bake it. It's done. We don't say MERCAVA patish. The baking it was the final stroke, but that's already called the oifa. But if after you bake something, you have to add another coating of earth, which is what they did by Yatano, they put another coating. So since there's a step that you do after oifa, and that's taka the final thing that you need to insulate the heat, that's called MERCAVA patish. That's huge. Because if not, you would argue that every single malacha is also MERCAVA patish. I cooked something, well, now it's ready. No, if the last thing that you did is a av bifnei atzmoi, we don't attach to it MERCAVA patish. Here, you finish baking the oven, and now you're adding up a coating. Okay, that's another step. Yeah, and since this is the final step, that's called MERCAVA patish. Gewaldig. Next. Chalta is some sort of large, round receptacle made out of reeds. Here you're going to be chayiv 11 chatois. And in Rashi, 3 lines under, he begins already with the pruning of the reeds. And we learned yesterday that when you prune reeds, but you want the reeds, you just mentioned that, Danny, that's both kaitzer and it is leitea. So there's reaping and planting and gathering in reeds and selecting good ones and smoothing them and slicing them. Slicing them is grinding, cutting them to a specific size, setting up the warp, setting the heddles, weaving the basket. And now, here you will have a MERCAVA patish because even after you weave, the basket is not ready. That's the hemshech. You would cut, you would trim the protruding reeds. Even though it's already functional beforehand, but people didn't use these kalim if it doesn't look finished. So here again, the word is there is a step after the weaving. If after weaving you're ready, you're not going to call the weaving a MERCAVA patish. We don't say that because that the final act is an av already. But since by the baskets they did this cutting of the finish is called a MERCAVA patish. And another detail, if you put a rim around the mouth, you sew a rim, then there's going to be another 2. From 11 you go to 13, and what's the other 13? Sewing and tying. Sewing and tying. And here the question is, where's the MERCAVA patish? We'll leave that question open because we have 10 more minutes. We have to go weiter. Okay, we're going back. We're moving on now to garment preparation, right? A makiv hakarif, and the Mishnah began with the shearing of the wool, and then you washed it, you whitened it. What we said in the Mishnah, malabma means whitening. Whitening means washing it. Amar Rabba, and we already spoke this out a couple of daf ago, way back, maybe a month ago, that when it comes to schita, right, there's 2 issues by schita. Sometimes schita is asr mishum melabein. That's when it's water in a garment. Sometimes schita is connected, I think, to dash, and to be aware of that. But let's go back. Amar Rabba bar Chana, the first white line, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. If you will spin the hair of the animal while it's still connected, you're going to be chayiv. You're going to have a final product, but you're going to go out of the seder. You're chayiv 3 chatois. What are the 3 chatois? What are the 3 steps? Ultimately, after you spin it, you're going to cut off the threads. You're chayiv because of shearing, even though you already did it on a final product. And there's also, before you began the spinning, you were menapates. We said menapates is disentangling the wool, and because of spinning. Says Rav Kahana, no, I disagree with you. Since this is not the normal Seder Hadvarim, so each one is going to be called Ein Darkoi Bekach. And if it's Shaloi Kedarkoi, this is the big stroke heter, you at least take it down a notch. It's not also Midrash, it's only also Midrabanan. Rav Kahana Omer, Ein Darach Geziza Bekach. The Geziza is normally done first. Ein Darach Menapitz. Menapitz is normally done when you already were Goizes. Ein Darach Tavi Bekach. And therefore, you're not chayiv, not a single chatas. That's not darke bekach. Didn't we learn Vatanya in the name of Rabbi Nechemia that in the desert, when the women that had chachma slave, the Torah says, they did whatever was the best for the beauty of the garments, for the greatest of the quality, and they knew how to taka do it on the backs of the animals, that they were shatuv be'izim, they washed the hairs on the goats, they tavu, they spun the hairs of the goats before they sheared it off the goats. That's the way they did it. And here comes a very fundamental rule in Hilchos Shabbos. And what's the fundamental rule that you to say? How do you define darke bekach or ein darke bekach? And guys, that's going to go into the next daf and to the next daf. Who is to define that? What happens if it's not darke for everyone, but it's darke for me? So many times in halacha we say batla datoi. Once this is the way most people do it, then that's the way it's defined, even if you do it differently. Now, when you speak about most people, who are we looking at? You know what we're looking at? We're looking at people in this profession. Here we go. Chachma Yisei Shani. Chachma Yisei Shani means that since even amongst the professional thread makers, most of them don't have this special gift that God gave the woman in the desert. And they shear it off the animal, and then they do the disentanglement, and then they do the spinning. Even amongst their group, they are in the minority. De facto in the Midbar, God gifted these women, or they had Chachma, and God gifted them. Everything is from Hashem. They had Chachma, then they were given Chachma again, and they did something extraordinary. It doesn't make it darke bekach. Even amongst their pros, they don't do it that way. Gewaldig. Chachma Yisei Shani. They're considered the minority. Batla data. Says the Gemara Vayit. Tanach Rabbanan. We're speaking about how toiles esh hakonaf. We have to become not city people. We have to become field people, country people. If you pluck out a feather from a wing of a bird, step number one, and then you would clip that feather. And then Mordechay, you will pull out some of the hairs that are on the base of this feather. Rab Shimon ben Lakish, Omar ben Shimon ben Lakish, toilish, plucking is a tulda of shearing, same concept. Cutting the hair off an animal, you're plucking the feather out of the wing of a bird. Koitem, when you are clipping it, since they clip these feathers for a particular size, you're cutting. And mimare, pulling the hairs out, is mimachek, is smoothing the hides. And by the way, the first step in the smoothing of the hides is also pulling out the hairs from the hide of the animal. Okay. Tying and untying. So that's the Gemara here. Until now, the Gemara never asked this question because it was clear how everyone was in the Mishkan. But tying and untying, not so simple. Where did they do that? Now, the Gemara knew the answer, but you're going to see what the Gemara understands. Here, unlike Bishul, temporary Bishul is called Bishul. You can say Bishul, right, is bringing up liquid to Yatzir Ledis. So it's going to cool off. That's Bishul. But by other things, we don't say temporary is not a malacha. That's going to be the problem with the Mishkan. So where do we find it in the Mishkan? And in that Amar Rava or Amar Rabba imens the Bach Shekain Koshrin be say this Oy Holland that they would tie the curtains into the pegs of the tents. Here's a machlokes rishonim. If you remember, even Chumash Rashi, did the pegs go into the ground? We're not speaking about the pegs. We're speaking about tying the ends of the curtains onto the pegs. That was tight. So that's kshida. Says no. How who question? Yeah, they tied it. But we traversed the desert for during the 39 years that we had a Mishkan. I'm saying 39 years because we only built it in the second year. But anyways, during those years, we untied, guys, if you remember, very important, Aflamad Aleph on the days when we were speaking about that Soiser, Almanas Livnois, Bim Mekoimai, and there's no Mekoimai in the desert. And the Gemara says, no, Al Pi Hashem Yachma, Al Pi Hashem Yiso, a Gavaldic concept. That's irrelevant here. Even though the building of the Mishkan was Al Pi Hashem, the moving was Al Pi Hashem, and we consider it all being done in the same hands of God, but still there was an act of taking the Mishkan apart. There was an act of putting the Mishkan together. And the Gemara is challenging that the tying and untying should be viewed as a temporary action. That's actually the meaning of a Mishkan versus the Migdash. It wasn't a permanent building. We moved around. What was the Havamina? The Havamina is that since we built it Al Pi Hashem, it's called permanent. But anyways, that's the kasha. Curtain weavers. If a thread ripped, then they would have to make a knot to keep it tied. Amalei Rava says, Rabu, good. So you found a good teretz. By the curtain weavers, they would make a knot. But what about untying? Where did they untie? Mater ma'ikal amemer. And if you're going to tell me, because the if there would be two knots, one on the side of the other, when you're doing one thread, it tore and you made a knot, then let's say you would have to make two knots already looks ugly. And in order, the way you would resolve it would be shari chad v'katan kad. You would untie one, and you would leave one to make it more beautiful. No one would do that. Chad, the katan chad says him no. When you're making garments, even for a human king, you would never allow to begin with to have two knots, one on the side of the other, because it doesn't look nice. Or when you would untie it, you would not leave an empty hole. It would not look nice. They never left. They never had two knots one near the other. And if that happened, they would already, while they're making it, they would add another thread, which would have to be tied to a place above and to a place below. But we would never have to one next to the other. And we spoke this out of the Mishnah. We needed to trap the chilazain. You need to have fishing nets. Their fishing nets were kosher no matirin. You make a net, sometimes you need to have a bigger net. Sometimes you have to have a smaller net. That's the way you manipulate nets, by tying and sometimes untying knots. Okay, I just want to say regarding tying knots, look inside the last Rashi, that I'm sorry, let's hop one more. We have one more minute to learn one more line. Yeah, the Mishnah went on to sewing. Now the Mishnah here, like Tosfos pointed out here, the Mishnah writes explicitly a shiur. The way we're learning, without the shiur, it's not chatzi shiur. You don't have the malacha. You have to do 2 stitches. Now, guys, many of us, even yeshiva chavre, we know how to sew kaviyachal. If the hem falls out, what's that sewing? What is 2? Just to know, 2 means 1 in, 1 out. 1 in, 1 out. 1 in, 1 out. Many times that I sewed my hem, it did not last. Right? You sew it, go, you put your foot in one time, and that's it. That's the end of that. Just 1 in, 1 out is not enough. So indeed, you're right. It's not enough just to sew 1 in, 1 out. The final Rashi in the Amid, you have to also make 2 knots. There are 2 knots. 1 out in the beginning, and then 1 out at the end. And by the way, making knots, Danny is also an av and a chanami. So you're going to be chayiv for making knots, but only if there is knots do we say that only 2 stitches is called an act of sewing. If you don't have the knots, then maybe if you stitch it 1,000 times, many times, but if it's not of permanency, you're not going to be chayiv. Just to finish with a Hasidic concept about these 2 acts of sewing, 2 tefillas, and a knot on the top and a knot on the bottom, that's really avodas ha'adam. Just to know, the going in and going out, that's the concept of Ratzah and Shuv. And we always have to be going in meaning closer to our neshama, closer to God, and then we have to do the kavanah, which is to come back into the world. And we should know that we are knotted to God. We're connected to God, and we are connected to our mission, which is Olam Hazeh. And this knowledge, right, that we are connected above, and we have a connection because of our purpose and mission that God gave us to below. Our avodah has to constantly be, we got to go in, we got to go out. That there's more moments that we have to get closer to God by that Shabbos, that's that learning Torah, that's davening, and then we have the shuv, which is mitzvahs. It's not enough. We got to come back to Olam Hazeh to fulfill our purpose over here. God willing, to be continued.
Rabbi, according to Rabbi Shimon, who holds Malacha Shein Tzorch L'Gufa Pater, how does he align with Bairer? I mean, you're taking out, isn't that Malacha Shein Tzorch L'Gufa?
So I spoke out the Baal HaMoir, very good. So the Baal HaMoir begins on Daf Ayin Daled by pointing out that since in the Mishkan, Bairer was removing soilus from Eichel, this is the definition of the Malach. You can't call it Malacha Shein Tzorch L'Gufa. The wordings fit better with what Tosfos says. Tosfos says, how do you define Malacha Shein Tzorch L'Gufa? That if it's not for the same purpose, they did it in the Mishkan, it's called Malacha Shein Tzorch L'Gufa. So when you take a mace out of the house, the hoitzah that they did in the Mishkan was because they wanted the beams to go from here to there. They wanted that which they were transporting. When a person takes a mace out of the house, they don't want the mace out of the house. They don't want the mace in the house. That's called Malacha Shein Tzorch L'Gufa. But when it comes to selecting, my selecting is exactly the way they selected it in the Mishkan. They wanted to get rid of the psilus. it even fits with Rashi. He just wants to point out that if some malachis, milachatchila breaks the rules. This, because it's that mada hava b'mishkan. If I do something exactly the way it was done in the Mishkan, that's the malacha legufa.
It's malachas machshavas.
And malachas machshavas, and it's called legufa. In the Mishkan, they wanted to get rid of the psilas. I want to get rid of the psilas.
Got it. Shkoyach.
So, Rabbi, at the end of the day, for today, for us with Boirer, we take, you're saying, all the different factors that each one of them.
All these three, all the three. Not all of them. We learned some that we don't apply Allah.
So wait, so if I want to cut salad, whatever, for later,
that's teichen. That's teichen. Don't confuse teichen to later. Okay, want to cut
no,
salad?
But if you're cutting it for, did we have an immediate use for salad, or I mean, if you're cutting the beets for now?
Okay, so you're confused. Not teichen. So I spoke out the Rashba. That's mamash the Rashba. The Rashba says aside of how you learn pshat and toisvus, mincing. The Gemara says mincing beets is called teichen.
Right.
Oh. So now the question is, can we use the hetadim of boider to teichen? Says the Rashba. The Rashba only speaks about the la'alter. He says if you're doing it la'alter, then it's not a problem. He understands that in the Gemara. Other Yisraelim say the Gemara didn't mention it.
Is that why some people squeeze lemons directly, let's say, onto a salad?
No, that's something else. That's something else. Something else. That's, in other words, that when you can't separate liquid from solids, but if the lemon is going direct on food, it's coming from oichel and it's remaining oichel. So it's oichel and oichel. If you're the lemon to oichel, that's...
And you have to eat it right away.
It's right away, correct.
Rabbi Zions, I know.
Right away. Yeah, who said that? Of course.
Some people on Shabbos are careful when they cut their challah or when they're making a salad that the slices should be the same size. Is there an Indian to do that?
Well, interestingly, by machatech, we learned when you cut anything for a specific size, it's machatech.
Right.
I don't think they say that by food. I don't think anything food is not called machatech, l'chayra. I don't know. Someone should check that.
I would think for carrot, you just cut it and rip it. You don't focus.
No. Some people cut it. Not everyone rips it.
Rabbi, you know
have
what?
a good Shabbos. Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos, guys.
Rabbi, you know, speak over here. President Shazar would drive a car, but wouldn't eat sunflower seeds on Shabbos.
Oh, because Labah, very good.
Dr. Rebbe.
That's something else, correct. That's called today Hasidish, but not frum. In Shidduchim, they use this term. He's Hasidish, but he's not frum. Have a good day.